podcast for those who suffer, which is everyone.
It's a space where we can speak honestly about what it feels like to be in desolate places without losing hope.
Welcome to In the Thicket.
Today we're sharing all about authentic dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable. We thought this would be a great topic in light of all the polarizing conversations that are happening right now, to remind ourselves of some tips that are useful for entering into those difficult conversations, and for us to be able to look at what it means to hold our own dignity up and the dignity of the person that we're talking to up. Hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. Not
How are you,
bad.
Erin?
Good. You guys just said both of those things in like total unison. Hi. How are you? Good.
Jinx. No take back.
Do you remember that when you're
Yeah.
like, Jinx, you owe me a Coke? Did you say that?
No.
See, we never did that with the Coke thing. I think that's like an Ontario thing.
I didn't really grow up in Ontario either, so I don't.
Maybe
I never
that
did
was like a Saskatchewan thing for me, because that was where I was at the Jinx time of history.
right. Is that
Erin,
not a thing anymore? Do
I
kids
don't
not
know.
say Jinx anymore? Is it like
I
history
don't know what the
now?
kids say.
Oh no. I don't know.
That's so funny.
Kids,
I
people with
don't know
kids,
what
tell
the
us what
kids
the
say.
kids say.
That's
Yeah,
right.
what do the kids say?
Do they say
Gosh.
Jinx? Do they say Jinx, you
Yeah.
owe me a Coke? And why
Yeah.
Coke and not Pepsi?
We
Is
would
Yeah,
just
it
be
exactly.
quiet.
prejudice?
Oh, guys, I have a very close family member who works for Pepsi, so I have to say Pepsi, not Coke. I
Okay.
endorse
But
Pepsi.
what if I don't? What if I don't like either?
Publicly.
That's so funny. In the Thicket is now getting into
Yeah.
product endorsements. So if
Oh,
you are a
dear.
company who's
Yes.
listening, that's great.
In the Thicket, sponsored by, I was
Oh
going
my
to say,
gosh.
can we say that? Anyways, we're
That's
not
right.
sponsored by anyone. We're
No,
just
we're
doing
not.
this for
We're
fun,
not.
guys.
All I
Just,
can hear is that into the thick of it. Into the thick
Oh.
of it.
Oh,
Do you know that
no.
thing? Okay, so on Instagram, like
it's-
sometimes I'll watch reels or whatever, and it's
Yeah.
all over the place.
Really?
But I don't know what it's from. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I don't either. Is it?
Is it like an Into the Woods thing?
Yeah,
Maybe,
that's what it
yeah.
sounds like to me.
Yeah.
You know?
It could be. Yeah.
I don't
Into
know all
the
the
thick
music
of
from
it.
that very well.
Ugh. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Oh.
Anyways, I keep thinking we should make like a reel, because it's like into the thick of
Oh,
it, and then
yeah.
into the
Oh my gosh.
thicket, Yeah, so maybe into the thicket.
Into the Thicket.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Nicole, you're in charge. That's
Oh, no.
that was perfect.
I can do music stuff, but I can't do reels. It so confuses me. I'm just like, I think I'm coming to accept this reality that I may never be somebody who's good at social media. It's just, I was born too late for that. And plus I don't have the interest and all the
Yeah.
things. I don't know.
Fair.
Well, that's good. That's okay. It's something to embrace,
Yeah.
So we're turning to our topic of the day, which is being uncomfortable, being okay with being uncomfortable with dialogue, which is a
Yeah.
huge topic. But I mean,
Yes.
this is kind of a fun question. If we're talking about dialogue, that's often deep things. So let's start with the shallow end, shall we? So like
Let's
small
shall.
talks. If you're small talk, I was thinking about this specifically, like what is the weirdest thing that has come up for you in small talk before, when you're just kind of just randomly talking to people? For me, definitely bowel movements for some reason. I'm not sure. Or like funny, like poop stories. I don't know why that comes up, but
Yeah.
it's a good one,
I can't think of anything right now, but I feel like I definitely have been a part of conversations. I don't know if it's with you, but where poop was definitely,
Yeah.
in the
It
mix.
probably was with me, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just have so many stories involving poop. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm similar, where it was like, okay, what's the weirdest thing? It would often be something related to like farting or bowel movements or poop. And part of it, honestly, is because when my mom was sick and she had the colon thing, if my parents are on episode, I think it's like 2 of last year or something like that.
Mhm. Yep.
Anyway, and so there was a lot of conversation regarding bowel movements and stuff around my house, and so we just got very comfortable with it. And then I forgot that not everyone talks about poop all the time, and
That's right.
so
Mhm. That's
yeah.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesse and Kathleen from We Are Found Together. So shout out to
Ooh,
those guys. They're
yes.
just putting out an
Yes.
album now, which is super exciting. So check
Yeah.
that out for sure.
Well, we're recording this in the summer, and they've
Yes.
just put out a single now, but in
Exactly. So the whole
fall-
thing will be
Yeah.
available because they're
Yeah.
doing like one
Right.
per week, which is awesome. So as you're listening, you can go check it out. So We Are Found Together, which is great. But I remember Jesse, he had
Oh, yeah.
like some bowel issues, and I'm not like, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
he's very public about it, so I'm not like, exposing some deep
Yeah.
dark secret.
Yeah.
But I remember when he had a colostomy bag, and he was, and with that, you can't control the sounds that come, and you can't
Right.
control when things happen, So they were
Right.
sitting in mass one time, and these are like guys who are working for Net Ministries of Canada, like very respectful, like devout guys. They're sitting in the pew at like daily mass at Divine Infant in Orleans, and there was some like church ladies who were sitting in front of them, and so Jesse's bag at one point was like like this. And the woman,
That's the
they all
best.
turned around and they were like, gave them the look like, you disrespectful whippersnappers.
So
How dare you?
mean. I feel like that's really mean. If that, even if it wasn't like a, like that situation, if it was just someone who just like farted and that's
But
what
I think it's because all the guys were like laughing hysterically.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
so
that
that's
makes more
why.
sense. I was like, if someone farts, you gotta just you gotta laugh, but quietly and just
Yeah.
ignore it. That's a respectable thing
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah, that's right.
And church.
Yeah. Do you see how all the conversations with me turn to poop? I just
Yeah.
like, it's
I
just
mean,
natural,
It
Yeah.
just happens.
To
Well,
be
okay,
fair,
so
we
sorry.
did like, we like that is the topic that we're on right now.
Yeah.
So it's not
Yeah.
entirely your fault.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
we so the house that I live in this week, we definitely had some this is definitely a poop story. So basically I think it was Tuesday evening, and my roommate was downstairs, and all of a sudden raw sewage started coming up through all of the drains in our basement.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it was like
no.
fountaining up, like
Oh,
fountains.
no.
Yeah, really
No,
gross.
no.
Yeah. Anyways, so then
No.
this is like 2 a.m. or something. So then
Oh,
she and one of the sisters that we live with were like cleaning it up.
Oh,
And it
bless
happened again the
them.
next day. So it
Oh.
happened twice. Anyways, so it turns out, yeah, sorry guys. Anyways, I hope none of you are listening to this while you're eating. If so, I really apologize. But you know what? Shit happens.
It's the truth. Oh gosh.
So anyways, we've had like Roto-Rooter here for the last 2.5 days trying to replace basically like all of the pipes in our house and under the ground were PVC except one section that was underneath like this addition that had been put on, and that was clay, and that had completely collapsed, hence the problem. Anyways,
Ooh,
so
that's
that's my poop story this week.
That's a little bit rough, but I
That's really
mean,
rough.
Yep.
wow.
I haven't. Well, it's not me. It happened to me personally, but I spent a week in Madonna House like a few years ago, and I think it was over lunch one time. One of the priests who's like been there since its inception, or like who's been there forever, was telling me about like when they first started and how they were setting up like the sewage lines and stuff like that, because they're what's the like when you're in the country, what's the like drainage
Like
Oh.
rural, like
Yeah.
but like a septic tank
yes,
or
yes,
septic
right.
Yeah. So, and please forgive me if anyone works in plumbing. I know literally nothing about this, but they were setting it up. Okay. And people had obviously been living there or whatever. And so there was like the tank and whatever, and the pipe, something happened where the pressure went the opposite way, and it just literally sewage just
Oh my
spewed out
gosh.
the pipe onto people. Like there were a
Oh
lot of
my
people
God.
working on it, and they're just literally covered.
Wow. That is,
Yeah.
man.
Isn't that
See,
crazy?
like this is in the thicket, just diving
Yeah.
into these really, situations of extreme suffering. That is, to me, that would be like the biggest nightmare of my entire life. Yeah. Actually, okay, one last story and then we'll dive into this thing. So I remember John
We should
McMullen.
rename this episode.
That's right. Exactly. We should. Yeah. John McMullen, who
Shit happens. I'm sorry.
Gosh, that would be actually, I'm in favor. I'm in
Yep.
favor, but yeah.
Okay, well, we'll see.
Sorry,
we'll see.
keep
We'll see what
going.
happens. Yeah. John McMullen, he works as the associate director of youth ministry for the Archdiocese of Toronto. He used to be a youth minister in Orangeville, where I was before, and I think it was when he was working for Toronto. He was driving on the highway in his van, and there was a septic tank trucker in front of him or whatever, and it like leaked or something at some point. So his whole car, his whole van was like covered in crap. I'm pretty sure it was like the winter time and it was like frozen on his
Oh my God.
That's awful.
I
What do
know.
you
I can't
do?
even.
I mean, you go to the car wash, I guess that's what you do.
I guess so. Like, I think he
Oof.
tried to pay somebody to like to clean it or something. But anyways, so let's move from the talk of nightmares to the topic at hand, which is actually kind of similar when you think about it. You know, like sometimes in conversations, stuff just
Yeah.
spews everywhere, and then what do you do with that? But to nail it down a little bit more specifics, we wanted to talk about difficult conversations which are happening. Like there's so much divisiveness in our culture right now, in our world, you know, like whether it's politically or religiously, in the church, outside the church, with all kinds of stuff that's just happening, you know, in situations in the world and all of these things. Everybody's got an opinion, and it also seems like that's kind of coinciding with this decrease in our ability to have dialogue or to have real discussion without reducing people to their positions, or without, you know, it goes into everything about cancel culture and all of these kind of things. So so that's what we're talking about today, is how to be comfortable with uncomfortable dialogue. So Rachel, you are like looking like you're chomping at the bit, so let's start with you.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm just excited to talk about this because I'm sure we've all experienced it, right? Like the pandemic itself has led to polarizing positions for people. And it's not like based on, we've talked about this before, like you could be a really good Catholic and come to a different position than another really good Catholic and have some good arguments there. And, you know, and I think people are trying to be respectful, but it's hard because there's so much passion and there's so much emotion involved in some of these issues. So even just the pandemic has brought this about in a really clear way. So I think it's definitely part of all of our lives right now. And it's something that we should be intentional about, because if we're not, then, you know, I think the devil is in the details sometimes in these kinds of things where, you know, we just ignore, or we just don't prioritize loving someone in dialogue, and then easily dialogue can get away from us. And I think, you know, honestly, that's happened to me so many times. Like my family, we're super close and we're all really passionate and we're all sort of like thinking, questioning people. And so like I lived with my brother for 2.5 years, and we don't agree on everything, even though our values are pretty much identical. And we would get into sometimes arguments that were like 5 hours long. You know, we got stamina, we can go forever. So like I learned actually in talking to my brother how I have to prioritize loving him in a conversation so that we end that conversation having grown closer, regardless of whether we grow to agree with one another rather than farther apart. And I think that's possible. It's possible if your values are the same, because I'm talking like there are those of us whose values are different, and that is really challenging. But right now it's even like if you share the same values, you might have really differing positions, and is like, you know, that can become divisive. And so yeah, I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's definitely close to my heart. This topic is important, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
I think one of the important questions, because, you know, we're talking about can we be okay to enter into dialogue? Like, can we just do this rather than sort of setting up us and them in battlegrounds, and I'm not going to talk to them because they don't believe this, whatever, you know. Can we actually dialogue? And I think that that's really important. But I think even you know, one thing to be important is, well, when is it the right time to dialogue, and with whom, and why? Why do I want to have this conversation, right? Because, A couple things. One is that like what we know about like trauma and repeated stress is that if somebody's gone through a really difficult thing related to a certain topic, or there's some sort of like basically emotional stressor that's happened related to a certain topic, then unless there's like healing of that, it's possible for us to, like I have certain things that I remember talking about. I think I was talking to siblings about like relationships and like dating and that kind of thing. And I was talking about stuff, and I had been through a breakup 4 or 5 months before that. This is a couple of years ago. Um, and a certain part of the conversation, like I shared something that was related to my past relationship. And then the person I was talking to kind of countered and was like, well, no, but da 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 da. And it was like something switched in me where I just started crying, and I couldn't be in this conversation anymore because it was like I had opened myself, like shared something that was a little more emotional, and gotten kind of shot down. And I was so hurt by that. And so I think that there's a double responsibility. One is to work on self-awareness, to know, am I in a place where I can have this conversation like calmly and lovingly, or is there something unresolved here that I need to work through first? And then on the flip side, if you want to have a conversation with someone, be like sensitive to, okay, this person's getting really emotional about this. Maybe we're not actually in a place to dialogue right now, and that's not their fault. It's not, if someone's, oh, don't get emotional, or we get annoyed when people get emotional, but actually, like, can we be sensitive and loving to that, and then be with this person who we don't know their whole story, we don't know what they've been through, right? So I think these are some of the complexities with wanting to enter into dialogue that are just really important to be aware of, that self-awareness and then other awareness.
Yeah. I think that's really important when we're talking about dialogue, because it's like I keep thinking about this one example, and it's just an example, and maybe people will disagree with, my assessment of it. But I remember when Steve Bannon was coming to Toronto, he was like Trump's
Oh, right,
whatever,
right.
White House chief, I think, or something for a while. And anyways, he's kind of associated with like some far right wing stuff and whatever. Maybe we get hate mail because I'm characterizing him wrong or something like that. But I remember when he came and he was speaking, and it was going to be at a debate, like an organized debate. I think it was like the Massey debates or something like that. So not something fringe, but something kind of very mainstream. And there were protests outside from people who didn't want him to speak because they were saying that his speech equals violence and hate language and things like that. And I don't think we're really talking about the political aspects of things today, but for me it kind of helped me to clarify something that I think for me is important anyways, is that I don't want to shut myself off from things that are different to the way that I think, because I think that's way more dangerous than allowing people to freely express like what they think on things. Because I know for me, even the way that I've come to think about many issues has changed, and it's been really influenced by people who feel strongly about those issues. And I've changed, like I've flipped totally on a bunch of things that I can think about, because I've had those conversations with people where they are hard and they are challenging. And I certainly am a very stubborn person. Like I feel very strongly about a lot of things, and so I'm not always the best at that, at like receiving people and exactly where they are. But I think it is something that we have to be like, the truth will out, like that's the saying, like the truth will out. And that's like even been the approach of philosophers over the centuries, is like this back and forth. And that's how theology works, is this back and forth of like helping us clarify the truth of something by different ideas coming together, and not in a comfortable way all the time, so I think that's important.
I think that that's exactly the reason why people struggle with this, because if I am being challenged on what I think, right, it's very uncomfortable. Like it's really, and especially if you are a truth person, like, we talk sometimes about truth, beauty, goodness in the Catholic sort of lingo world. And some people are drawn more to one of those three than others. And some of us are really drawn to truth. And if you're a capital T truth person, it's so funny because you crave that dialogue, but you also hate it because it's like, it
Mm.
sometimes totally undermines the whole system with which you're thinking and your whole framework. And that's really scary. And I think people who are frequent dialoguers, that's a word, they're kind of, they get used to that. It's almost like working out, right? Like you go to the gym and you sort of get used to lifting weights and you're like, oh, I know that this is good pain, so I can handle this. But if you're not used to working out and you just go a couple of times, you're like, this really sucks, like I don't want to do this is really awful. And I think for a lot of people who don't have a lot of dialogue in their lives, that's the experience. It's like, well, this is shaking up like, why would I ever do this? And I think, there's sort of this tendency to demonize the other person rather than actually listen to what they're saying and think about what they're saying. When I was in law school, we did this case. It's called the Whatcott case. It's about this guy who you know about it maybe. So if you don't know about this case, it's this guy who was passing out literature about homosexuality, and so he was calls himself, I think, formerly homosexual, and had some kind of conversion at a probably quite a conservative Protestant church community, and started sort of a campaign, where he would drop off these flyers at people's houses to say, like, I don't know, so they were pretty, provocative, the flyers, I think, in terms of the language that he was using. And he, his case was taken all the way up to the Supreme Court in terms of like whether or not this was hate speech and this kind of thing. And honestly, I don't remember all of the details of the outcome of the case, but the important thing for me was, as I was doing this study, we had a lot of really interesting conversations in my classroom because I had a great professor, which is rare, but I had a really good professor who let us think critically about this. And I realized, like, we have a very strong, all of us, we have very strong bias against people who speak using words and expressions and mannerisms that are offensive or that are, and that's normal. Like we do, getting offended in those situations is normal. But what's maybe hard for us to do is to still seriously consider what they are saying. You know what I mean? Like someone can speak, and what I realize is, like, that's a bad bias because there are people who have varying levels of, let's say, education or even just culture, right? And the way that they speak may come across as more aggressive or more passionate, or just the words that they use are less sophisticated and they're not as calm in conversations. And that can lead me to literally dismiss what they're saying. But what they're saying there might be a point there. And I'm not saying like Whatcott had a point, but I'm saying, by shutting down his speech because it's offensive, we may be shutting down something legitimate. And, one of my philosophy professors was like, everyone has something true to say. Like there's something true about what everyone is saying at some level. And I think I was really like, that really changed the way in which I interact with everyone in general. Cause I realized I had this really kind of bougie, posh, sophisticated bias where I was like, well, if you can't dialogue at my level, as if my level was like the level to, to have to aspire to or something.
I mean, it is like, let's just acknowledge it. It totally is. Yeah.
Well, thanks. I mean, I always knew that was true, but no, obviously, I mean, like, the arrogance of that is like unbelievable. And I had to just be like, whoa, wait a second. So if somebody who has never been to university, like maybe like, but they've had, 25 years of life experience, like maybe I should shut up and listen to what they're saying, even if it's really hard for me to do that because they're using words and mannerisms and saying things that I just, make are like fingernails on chalkboard.
Right.
But like, anyways.
I think what's important in that, and what I want, like, what's resonating with, well, many things are resonating with me, what you said. And I think that challenges even my own, assumptions. Like I've never thought about that before of like, an expectation of the way that someone dialogues as prerequisite for dialoguing with them is that's just like a kind of a bias that I may have. So it's like, okay, I have to think about that. But just what you said is okay, that there's a little bit of truth in what someone may be saying. So even if I'm listening to someone, I'm like, wow, like I'm pretty much disagreeing with like 99% of what that person is saying. And oh my God. But then I'd say, well, what's the 1%? What's the 1% where I
Mhm.
can be aligned and where we can connect and work towards some sort of, yeah, I don't know,
Yeah.
like some sort
No.
of relationship, you know?
That totally makes sense because it is relationship. Like this is the thing is it's like monolith arguing against monolith is totally pointless almost, you know? I mean, whatever. It has some kind of place, you know, in debate or in, you know, discussion of, you know, political whatever.
Right.
But if that's done at the expense of or at the exclusion of relationship, then it's so
Yeah.
dangerous because it's very easy for me to write off an idea and it should not be easy for me to write off a person. And
Right.
like we've talked about before, like when I used to work at the Newman Center at the campus ministry in Toronto, that was one of the things that we would talk about because the campus itself is very liberal. A lot of Catholic students would encounter a large amount of opposition in some of the classes that they were in. So it becomes really necessary to see like what is the desire of the heart underneath an argument. Like if you're entering into a dialogue with somebody, and there's a large amount of variation or whatever in what you're talking about, that it becomes necessary to see like to be willing to see that there is some good there and there is good because I think it's very exceedingly rare that somebody holds a position because they desire to be an evil jerk. Like that's just not the reality, you know? So there is something of that desire in people that we need to be willing to discover, to see.
Yeah. There's so much Madonna House in my brain right now. I don't know why, but like, shout out to Madonna House. And if you don't know what that is, look it up. It's in Combermere, Ontario. It's a beautiful place. And you know, if you need to think, it's a wonderful place to go to. But yeah, when I was there, I was there over Pentecost actually. And the priest at the mass gave this beautiful homily. He talked about a concept that Catherine Doherty came up with called the laundry of love. And he was like, everyone's, when we listen to people's words, we should allow them to pass through like this laundromat inside of us. It's like the laundry of love, you know, and like only allow what is love to remain and like pray and ask the Holy Spirit to help us to sort of filter out everything else, but to keep what is love there to remain. And then the same going out, like as we think about what we're going to say, like process it through this like laundry of love. And like, and then you have, you know, the best of what you intended to give to that person. And I have that image in my mind now, like, you know, I have this like sort of like laundromat, like from the, you know, from the Renaissance or something. Cause it's not a laundromat. It doesn't have the laundry of love in my being is not a like washing machine laundry.
It's like
That's
a
so great.
washboard.
I would like
Yeah,
you to
yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah. I would like you to create an image so we can post that on social media. This is Rachel's brain
Laundry of
laundromat.
love.
Laundromat
Yeah.
of love.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
you know,
great.
it's an intense place in my brain. It's actually, I literally have an image from a movie. It's from, yeah, have you guys seen Ever After with Drew Barrymore? You know, the
Oh,
really,
yeah.
at the end of the whole thing, her stepmother, sorry, spoilers, but her stepmother and stepsisters get like banished to the laundry basically instead of killed. And they're like, and they have to dye these cloths and do all these things. It's just like matron who's really tough. And I feel like that is the kind of laundry of love that's in my mind. Because I think it has to be a tough place in a way. Like you have to hold your words to a high standard and you have to be tough also receiving stuff in because there is something there, like squeeze every last drop out of it and get whatever is good there, you know, if you can.
Yeah.
My family has been kind of going through this because we discovered that different members of my family have different opinions on vaccines, COVID vaccines, specifically, not all vaccines, but COVID ones. And so there's been a lot of conversation, and it's been really tough and, you know, very strong and well thought out and well kind of like just well thought out opinions on both sides of the thing, you know. And so it's been really tough, but I think something that I think there's two things that have been helpful. and it look, hasn't, I'm going to talk about it and be like, oh, these great things. And it's like, it hasn't always been, we haven't always dialogued perfectly by any shot, but, yeah, but one, is that there's this commitment and like a articulated commitment that we're like, okay, first and foremost, we love each other and we don't want this to be something that divides us. Like we don't want this to be something that, you know,
Mhm.
And there's been a willingness to kind of have conversations about differences of opinions, and kind of there was some article and sharing back and forth and then talking about those things, and so that was good. But I think also what happened at one point, I know this kind of goes against what we're talking about too, but that there had to be some boundaries set where we're like, okay, we've
Mhm.
discussed this,
Yeah.
we've been talking about this for weeks, and no one's going to convince anyone anymore because we all have well thought out opinions. They're just different, and we just all have to trust that that God is God has the last word, and that God is holding us even if we come to different
Mhm.
decisions. And then to say, okay, we're not actually going to talk about this anymore. Like
Yeah.
it's now like just an off topic or off limits kind of conversation topic. Because it's just we've done it,
It's
it's
done.
been
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
So I think that's
Um,
important too.
Yeah, which makes
Mhm.
sense. I mean, that like it's funny because there's kind of two extremes to that, right? So like one is you could just keep pressing in and keep, which then at some point just does damage to your relationship because it's easy for things to creep in. They're not listening to me, or like how could whatever. But then also kind of highlights the need that we have to be willing to enter into those discussions to begin with, because
Yeah.
that's been like, I'm not really sure what, like, I sound like I'm 87 when I'm saying this, but I'm not really sure what the difference is between those younger generations but really, if you look at kind of the divisiveness in culture, or I think that there is a big difference between the ability to enter into difficult discussions and difficult topics between the generation when I kind of grew up in high school and university and the generation that exists now, whether it's because there's so much there is kind of, we talk about this cancel culture, things like that, like there is kind of that things feel more polarized right now to me. And so I think what I kind of have seen in my, whatever experience of working with younger people, whatever, again, I sound like I'm like 80, but in my experience, it seems like there is a real fear around entering into those difficult discussions in the first place, even if they don't have to do with issues, but like talking to a boss about something difficult, or
Yeah.
setting a boundary there, or talking to a parent about some difficult topic that you want to discuss, or something like that, because there is a specific, like, there's a fear that when we enter into those things that we're going to encounter suffering, like we're going to
Yeah.
possibly encounter something that is hurtful to us. And there's a natural self-protectiveness that comes from that, which in some sense is good, because we shouldn't just go around willy-nilly, like entering into things with no sense of like our own instincts of like, ooh, I have to be careful here, or something like that. Like, but at the same time, it's not good for us to let that fear control us, because then again, it's these conversations that help us to love. Like
Yeah.
you can't love somebody from far away, like you can pray for them, and that is an act of love, yes, but it requires an intentional, and that person that shares a different opinion to one that I hold is just as worthy of love as the person who thinks the same way that I do.
And
Yeah.
also I think like we need to stamp our security. I know, okay, obviously truth is super important. God is truth, and I love truth, like the pursuit of truth. I'm
You are a
all
T.
about it.
You are a
I'm
T. Yeah.
definitely, I actually, I think I'm a beauty just a smidge, like the tiniest micro smidge above truth, but like they're so close, and I'm such a truth person. I think this is important because we have to ground our knowledge in the love of God, who is truth, right? Like if we are encountering God, we are encountering truth more than knowledge of like information about the truth, because the data information that we have is always going to be less than perfect. It's always filtering through a mind and a brain that is less than perfect. And I think there's a kind of humility that we have to acknowledge that, you know what, my being my existence in the world, my capacity to relate is based on God's love for me, and not how close to the truth I am right now and my understanding of it. And I think that even just that acknowledgement that, like, I don't have all the answers, but I'm trying. And this is what I think, in good faith and in fairness is the right answer here. But just to acknowledge before the Lord, like, none of us, we don't have the whole picture. We never will. And that can bring a kind of compassion and forgiveness for the other person as well, who is struggling through the imperfection of what's
Mhm.
available to know and how they are able to know. And I think if we're grounded in the love of God for us, then we're a little bit more free to be challenged. We're a little bit more free to be right and wrong. Like,
Mhm.
we're not sitting up on a high horse in our rightness, and we're
Mhm.
not down in the depths of the
Yeah.
pit in our wrongness. Like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
we're fine because God
Yeah.
loves me, and that's really what matters. And I'm
Mhm.
able to play with that. I'm able to enter into the world of understanding and knowledge and learning, with that kind of freedom,
Yeah.
because I'm not about, like, that's not my identity. My
Yeah.
identity is not how right I am about anything.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think it's really important. And I think, like, sort of bringing those things together and going back to Aaron talking about, like, just maybe generational differences and stuff. I think this is even related to our COVID experience, where we're all interacting a little more virtually, but our a lot of our interactions have become more virtual. And I think that um, when we extract the ideas or the thoughts that I have about things, and those become, posts on a Facebook wall or on Twitter
Mm,
or on whatever other, and that becomes now disconnected to who I am as a person because you're not seeing me. I think there's something happening there where, like, if you're in a room with somebody and you can see the person and you're reading their body language and you're hearing their tone of voice and you're sensing where they're at. I think it's more possible to just have some empathy and enter
yeah.
Mhm.
into those dialogues in a more human way. But when the what I think gets sort of abstracted from who I am, it's I think we struggle, and it's um I think that it's possible that we're starting to almost have people defined as defined by what they think rather than who they are.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And we think those are the same. They're not the same.
Yeah.
And I think that's just really
Yeah.
important to note. And that we might have even all be a little bit more susceptible to that right now because we've been more isolated, and
Mhm.
we need to go and be
Yeah.
with people and see people.
It's very true because that's even like it's an extension of Cartesian dualism, right? Like
Yeah.
so this is the idea like stemming from René Descartes and some of the philosophers around his time that the real me is the person who lives in my head, that the real me is not a unity of body and soul, but it's somehow this disembodied person, and then the body is just something that I inhabit, which then becomes this thing, of course, like we can, if that's the truth, then we can manipulate the body as we see fit. We can do with the body as we see fit because it doesn't have a consequence because it's not me. And in some sense, social media is a lot like that, right? Like it's a disembodied reality that plays kind of into the hands of yeah, this Cartesian dualism, right? And then exactly, it becomes very easy if it's disembodied to like reduce a person just to yeah, a brain thought or something like that, where people are like, we are a composite of body and soul, and that's like body, soul, mind, spirit, like all of these things together. So it's a very reductive way of thinking about people.
I know we're getting close to our our God wings time, but what you guys are just talking about is actually challenging me so much, because there's two sort of things that I haven't resolved right now. One is, you're right, we're not disembodied, we're whole people, and what we think is a part of our like whole reality, right? But then there's also the reality of, like, it's also healthy to dialogue with ideas instead
Mhm.
of making the person you know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
the
Right.
person and their idea is important. It's important not to forget the person when you're dialoguing with the idea, but it's also important to remember that the person is not the idea. Like, you critique the idea, don't like berate the person, but you can critique the idea. And I
Right.
think that's actually also, that is kind of a foil of what you're both saying, because I think you know
Yeah.
their thoughts are not who they are. It's part of
Mhm.
their experience and part of who they are, but child of God first, right? And then, but their ideas and their thoughts are something that we can dialogue. But then I think you're right, Nicole. We also have to be aware of how much of this idea is an idea that's been thought about, and how much of it is just this person being wounded or feeling whatever they're feeling and actually expressing something of where they're at more than actually the idea that they're communicating. Because sometimes that's the case too. Someone is dialoguing with you, but they're not actually talking about the issue.
Right. There's
Mhm.
other stuff happening.
There's other
Mhm.
stuff happening. So like to be aware of
Sure.
all of those pieces.
Yeah. See,
Yeah,
this
I
is
think,
good.
yeah.
Sorry, you
Well,
go.
I think it comes down to just like we're always called to love the person.
Yeah.
And I think that it becomes harder to do when we always see is, the Twitter post that's just a few words long and we don't actually know the person, we don't know their story, we don't know their context.
Mhm.
But we don't have to love every idea because
Yeah.
that's not the same thing.
Mhm.
But even if we don't love the idea that a person has said, we are still called to love that person. And so it's navigating, how do we do that? How can I dialogue with this idea and talk about it and have a good discussion while still having my primary goal being to love the person, love this
Mhm.
person.
Yes. I
This
love
is so
that.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is like, even I feel like even in this discussion, like batting some of these things back and forth, I'm like, yeah, we're getting to something even deeper here, which
Yeah.
is awesome. Yeah, which is great. I mean, we could probably talk about this for hours and hours, and I'll be interested, like, if you have thoughts on this, you're listening right now, and you're like, you guys are full of crap, or you're like, yes, or I
Should
think
be
this is something
appropriate
yeah,
for this
exactly. Yeah, that's
episode.
right. Exactly. Exactly. We could call it full of crap. That would be a
Yeah.
fun title. But yeah, we love to hear from you. So feel free to shoot us an email, or yeah, you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook at In the Thicket Podcast. And we definitely would love to hear what your thoughts are on it. And I'll turn it over to you, Nicole, because you have a God wink for us this week.
I do. So, okay, so I'm in the middle right now while we're recording this podcast. I'm about 2.5 weeks out from my move to the US. And I need to buy a car because that's what I'm told I need one down there. But it's just been like one of those things where I'm like, okay, I'll figure it out when I get there. I have my bicycle. I can use that to get around. I'll figure it out because I just have too many things to figure out right now. But my boyfriend's dad who they live in the States, has been keeping an eye out for used cars, and one came up that they just kind of confirmed today that I'll be able to buy this car. And the cool thing is, which is great, and the fun thing is that so my old car, before I moved to Toronto, where I didn't need a car, my old car was a Toyota Matrix. That's kind of like navy blue, and I liked it. It was like a good little car, and spacious. Yeah. And this one is like, it's the same color, and it's a Toyota Prius, so it's a different model, but it's the same color as my old car. So it sort of feels like, I don't know. It just felt like I'm like, okay, I don't even have time to look at this, and then God just provides me this car that's just like a continuation of my old car or something. So it's just,
That's awesome.
it's like one of those little things, but it just made me happy.
That's awesome. That's
yeah.
so great.
Cute.
Yeah.
That reminds me of Gilmore Girls and Lorelai and how she picks cars. She picks them based on how they make her feel. She just like gets it. She's like, nope, it's not right.
That's hilarious.
Joy.
Yeah, she ends up just like refurbishing the body of her old car because no car makes her feel like
that's so funny. She's like the Marie Kondo of
cars.
Yeah. Iterations. Yeah, that's great. Sure. Oh my man, this has been such a great discussion. I really enjoyed this discussion today. So yeah, again, listeners, we'd love to hear from you, but we're really grateful that you've joined us this week, and I'd like to do a shout out to Chrissy Bubs, who is on social media. And I know Chris, we know, well, a couple of us know Chris anyways from the Newman Center in Toronto. He was doing music performance, a music performance degree, and he's such a talented musician, pianist. And anyways, we just wanted to say thanks, Chris, for all the support, and to all of those who've kind of left us reviews and things like that. And if you would be so kind to go on to, Apple or wherever you listen and leave a review, that helps people to find the podcast more easily and to know that we are not full of crap, truly.
Yeah, I was going to say, we are sometimes full of crap, but mostly not.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. So we'd be very grateful. But With that, we look forward to talking with you next week. Have a good
Bye,
week, everybody.
guys.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Thicket. If you like what you hear, give us a rating and hit that subscribe button. We have new episodes every Monday with more stories and honest conversations about life when the going gets rough and the hope and humor amidst it all. We'd love for you to join our community on Instagram and Facebook at In the Thicket Podcast. While you're there, let us know how we can pray for you. God bless and see you next week.